Hello. Thank you all for coming. My name is Joy Sheehan. I'm event coordinator here at Wealthquest. Just want to welcome you all. So many people in our room right now. That's so fun. And thank you, friends on Zoom that are streaming in to join us. Later in the presentation, James will have some question answer time. I'll be coming around if you have questions with this microphone, and just ask you to ask your question into the mic so our friends on Zoom can hear it as well. I also need to draw your attention to a disclaimer verbiage slide. If Corey would pop that up, thank you. Just basically saying this is not an official advising session. So just have to put the verbiage up. Yeah, thank you. Well, today we're welcoming James Lenhoff. He's co-founder of Wealthquest, and he's going to share some insights that he's learned from years of walking through advising families in their finances, particularly as it pertains to teaching skills to our children to steward their resources well. Well, recently, a pastor at my church shared something with us that I thought applies really well to what James is talking about today, and I just wanted to share this with you guys too. In the 18th century, there was a man named Jonathan Edwards who was a preacher, philosopher, theologian, and author. And he was also brilliant. Brilliant. He attended Yale University at the age of 13 and later went on to serve as president of the College of New Jersey, better known as Princeton. He was a busy fellow, and he was very busy because he also had 11 children. He made this resolution, which he kept over the years, that he would spend significant quality time with his children every day. And if he missed it, he'd make it up. Scholar Benjamin Warfield of Princeton later charted the 1,394 known descendants of Edwards, and what he found was an incredible testament to Jonathan Edwards. Of his known descendants, there were 13 college presidents, 65 college professors, 30 judges, 100 lawyers, 60 physicians, 75 Army and Navy officers, 100 pastors, 60 authors of prominence, 3 United States senators, 80 public servants, including governors and ministers to foreign countries, and 1 vice president of the United States. The story of Jonathan Edwards is an example of what some sociologists call the 5-generation rule, and how a parent raises their child, the love they give, the values they teach, the emotional environment they offer, and the education they provide influences not only their children, but the 4 generations to follow. So I'd like to welcome James Lenhoff as he shares with us some tips and thoughts on how we can help to make an impact on our future generations.
That's great. Thank you,
James.
Yeah, this is such a great setup because, can you guys hear me through the speakers? Is that okay? Can you hear okay? Okay, gotcha. Well, I do have the booming, annoying radio voice, so you should be able to hear me even without this thing. But the thing that's so fun about the setup that Joy just gave us is this incredible sense of inadequacy that we all probably felt as we listened to the unbelievable lineage of this guy and all the stuff that happened coming out of his family. And we're going to talk about how we're transitioning our wealth to the next generation. And when we talk about that in this industry, if I can get this thing to work. Oh, there we go. This is what we say. If you guys have heard this adage, the first generation makes it, the second generation spends it, and the third generation blows it. This is how it looks. And I can tell you 23 years of doing this, this is a lot of how it looks. There are examples that sound a little bit more like Jonathan Edwards and his incredible lineage, but for the most part, what we see are things like this. You might have, even in your family, some horror stories. You might have some examples that you've had with your kids where you've noticed their tendency to overspend. Maybe you've seen in your grandkids, if you have them yet, their tendency to just completely blow it. And you're going, yeah, this is the train I'm on, right? And it is terrifying. And what happens, unfortunately, is when we think about this statement and we see examples of it around us, our response to that fear, counterintuitively, sets the next generation up for failure. So if you watch your kids and their reaction and their behavior with money generally what you do in reaction to that behavior is actually reinforcing the wrong things. And my job today is to help us understand what we're doing wrong and how to actually set them up for success. Most of the time, as I work with families, I would say that the average conversation about money is something like, yeah, we have some, don't ask too many questions, right? Yeah, there's some things set up, don't worry about it, you're gonna be okay. Money is taboo. We hide it. We don't talk about it. And when we don't talk about it, we add a lot of confusion. We set our kids up to make assumptions, to come to conclusions that might be wrong. And ultimately, we reinforce a lot of things that lead them to this outcome. Maybe you've had some conversations where you started to maybe even let your kids in on the real numbers that are involved. Maybe you haven't even gone there yet, but you tiptoe a little bit in and you can almost see them start to rub their hands together, right? Like they're like, oh yeah, here we go. And that causes us to pull back from that ledge of actually getting to a place of vulnerability and authenticity. And when we do these things, like layering in all of these protections in our estate documents to protect them from themselves, we only prolong in a lot of ways the inevitable. And so that's what we're going to fight against today. All these things end up making it worse, and we want to actually figure out how to make it better. I don't care if we're talking about your kids, who might be toddlers, might be teenagers, might be 63-year-old toddlers, right? Like, it doesn't matter what stage they're in. We're going to talk about how to actually meet them where they are and give them some really great access to understanding and growing their muscles in this place before we leave the earth and just drop a bomb of wealth on top of them and have them turn into lottery winners. I don't know if you guys know the statistics around lottery winners. It's awful. The vast, vast majority of lottery winners end up being bankrupt within the first 3 years of winning because they don't know how to do this. We are preparing the next generation to act like lottery winners, and that's my concern. So I want this to be a little bit interactive. I'm going to ask some questions. I also am totally comfortable. I know where I am, so if you want to stop me and ask a question, please do. But know that we're going to have a big section of question and answer time at the end, and my hope is we can actually get into some specifics for things you might be dealing with your kids or your grandkids. So here's the first question that I want everybody to just give me the answer. If you've listened to the podcast, maybe you already have the answer, so just hold that one. Let's have this be an open dialogue. Don't jump straight to the answer I want to give. But what do you think is the hardest part about money? As you've watched your kids or your grandkids experience money, what would you say has been the hardest part? And I'll repeat it for the people on Zoom. By the way, hi. Thanks for being here. All right. What do you guys think? What's the hardest thing? Spending it? Is that what you said? Yeah. Yeah, our tendency to spend it. Absolutely. Really hard, particularly in this environment, right? We are bombarded with opportunities to spend it. You know what you need? You know what will make you super happy? You know what you can't live without is this thing you've lived entirely without until right now. You need this thing, right? What else? Not losing it. Yes. Yes. Protecting it, right? Yep. Any other thoughts? What's that? Teaching them to save it. Keeping it. Yeah. What were you going to say, Jack? Budgeting. Yes. Tracking it. Understanding it. Knowing where it's going, right? I teach a lot of stewardship classes, and one of the things we talk about is that a faithful steward will always be able to tell you where it went and why. And so often, that's not part of the equation. If it's not been modeled or they've never been asked to do it, they don't have a reason to know why or where it went, right? So all of those things are great. One of the things I just want to point out is what we didn't hear was the hardest thing about money is the mathematical complications of it. They need to understand taxes. They need to understand how things layer in. They need to understand estate documents. That's the stuff we add, quite frankly, but it's never actually the hard part. My argument, and what this entire thing is going to be based on, so if you disagree with me, you can go ahead and leave now. But my argument is that the hardest thing about money is the having of it. Our brain is designed to enjoy and delight. We want to avoid threats and we want to go and experience pleasure. It's the entire design of our wiring psychologically. And so the hardest thing about money is having it, just letting it sit there, not immediately having our brain fire all the things we could do with it, all the ways we could enjoy it, all the stuff that we could buy, all the experiences that we could have. We struggle. We all struggle with the having of it. And what I want to argue is the reason why you have it is because you've worked this muscle. You've gotten good at the having of it. You don't have this constant noise in your brain, or at least you've gotten really good at silencing it. And you allow the money to just sit there and do what it needs to do without getting in its way. We think that the hard part of money is all these other things, and all those other things ultimately boil down to the having of it, right? Saving it, having it, protecting it, having it, tracking it, spending it. It's all related to having it, and the having it is the problem. That's the hard part. That's what we actually need to work on, but we tend to do it wrong. And so if you can go back with me to the young days of your kids, or if you're in that stage now, just yesterday, right? You probably remember a moment in time where you're walking through the grocery store and someone, one of your kids, maybe a grandkid, says, "Buy me that useless piece of plastic," right? Like, oh, I need that useless piece of plastic. I need it right now. And what do? What do we say? No, that's a useless piece of plastic. We don't want to buy that useless piece of plastic. Here's the way this works. We make huge mistakes as parents and grandparents because we get in the way of the fall. Here's what I mean by that. Your kids have all learned how to walk by falling. They don't learn how to walk by you lecturing them on the laws of physics or throwing a book at them about the laws of gravity. They learn to walk by falling over and over and over again until they finally start walking. They master that muscle memory of balance. When we as parents say no, we block the fall. There's a huge opportunity in that moment for your kid or your grandkid to buy that useless piece of plastic and learn from it. But instead, we block it. We say, no, it's a useless piece of plastic. I know that because I've bought plenty of useless pieces of plastic over my lifetime. And I can tell by looking at it, it's not going to do what you think it's going to do, right? So then, what does the kid do? They dig in their heels. They whine. They throw a tantrum on the floor. I will never forget a moment in the grocery store where my son, Wes, my middle son, Wes, is my spender. And my parents are sitting right here and they can vouch for that, right? Such a spender. And he would throw a fit and I would just kind of walk along and say, "Where are your parents?" And just keep going. I'm not doing this, but they fight. They want it so bad. And the reason why they want it so bad is they have no reference point for what it costs. They don't care. It doesn't cost them anything. And so we end up giving in and we buy the thing. And it is, turns out, surprise, surprise, a useless piece of plastic, right? Breaks in the car on the way home. And what do we do next? We blame and shame. See, I told you. This is useless. Why don't you listen to me? Right? You wasted my money. I told you it was a useless piece of plastic. I told you it would break. And all we reinforce at that moment is that we are better than they are. We're smarter than they are, and they need us to make these decisions for them because they don't have any money. We're the ones making all their decisions. And when they pressure us to make a bad decision, they pay for it in lectures and shaming. All of this leads to a really fun and super healthy power struggle, right? Just this constant give and take. And at the end of the day, the kid is looking at that useless piece of plastic and he's saying, if I fight hard enough, they'll give in, right? And if I fight hard enough and they give in and then it doesn't work, all it costs me is listening to the same lecture that I've heard before. It's worth the power struggle. Like, let's do the fight, and you get in these patterns. And at the end, what we perpetuate is dependency. Money's too hard. It's too complex. You need to just let me make all these decisions for you. And what I want to argue is that I have seen this happen with 3-year-olds. I've seen this happen with 13 and 14 and 18-year-olds. I've seen this happen with 72-year-olds. where they're still in the same power struggle and they're still in the same perpetuated dependency with their 90-something-year-old parents. This pattern doesn't just end when they go off to college. Sometimes it gets worse. The power struggles get bigger because the numbers get bigger. So the bottom line we need to understand is that money is experiential. It is not mathematical. It is relational. It's emotional. It's all the things that are not related to what we traditionally think of as the complexities of money. And we need to give our kids and our grandkids access to that. If the hardest part of money is the having of it, we actually need them to have some. We actually need to give them access to working that muscle. These are the experiences they normally have, which is why they never grow. What are the experiences that they need to have? And what are the experiences that we're giving them? So let's talk first about what the experiences are that we're giving them. If you think about what experience every kid has had when it comes to money, does anything come to mind? Like, what's the thing you've done with your kid when they were little that all of your friends, everybody else was doing? On their birthday, they get a check, $100 from grandma and grandpa. What do you do with it? You go to the bank, right? The only experience we give our kids is, here's what happens. Here's how money works, son, daughter. We get money and we go to this thing that has brick and mortar and a bunch of really pretty, artwork or whatever. And although our artwork's pretty too, so I shouldn't make fun of that too much. But we go to this thing and we put it in there. And then this is the having of it, right? Now you have some. And what do they actually experience? 6 months later, that $100 has earned a penny of interest. And what they learn, what they experience, is that having money is stupid. Saving money is dumb. It's so boring. It sat in there for so long and nothing happened. What I should do is just spend it, right? We reinforce the wrong behaviors because the only experience we give them is a really disappointing one. What they need. These are the two experiences that every kid needs, and I don't care how old they are. This is what they need. They need buyer's remorse, and they need the miracle of compound interest. These are the only two things. This is the secret that unlocks managing the having of money. Buyer's remorse is the Yoda of finance. Buyer's remorse is that incredibly beautiful experience of wasting money on something and realizing it didn't do what I thought it was going to do. The packaging, the marketing packaging lied to me, right? I thought this thing was going to make me happy, and all it did was make me angry. My son, Wes, again, my spender, he's going to come up a few times in this conversation. I keep waiting for this to really land on him. One of his favorite places to go is Five Below. You guys have heard of that store? Oh, I hate that store with every cell in my body. I hate that store. So we go into that store, and he's like a kid in a literally candy store, but he's buying these things, and I'm like, hey, buddy, what do you think are the chances that that Bluetooth speaker that has a fountain in it, that's only $5, is going to do anything that it claims to do? What are the chances? Just give me some odds, right? But that's this entire store's business model, is selling garbage to you for $5 that you then just go and throw away as soon as you get home, right? It's like this, it's amazing. But the problem is, if I go into that store and I buy that thing for Wes, it doesn't cost him anything. I have buyer's remorse, for sure. But if it's not his money, there's no learning. Everybody's going to have the same buyer's remorse. And my argument is, the sooner we can get buyer's remorse in the game, the less it's going to cost. Just like when your kid learns how to walk when they're 16 inches off the ground, the fall is a whole lot less painful than if they wait until they're 6 foot tall, right? And I have seen a lot of 6 foot tall humans learning how to walk when it comes to money. And the fall is massive and the damage is really big. You're looking at it and you're going, that one's going to break a hip, right? Like there's commas involved in the mistakes, right? It just gets worse, but it's the same mistakes. So the sooner we get access to it, the better. The other piece is the miracle of compound interest. I tell everybody there's only two kinds of people in the world, only two kinds: the people who understand the miracle of compound interest and earn it, and the people who don't and pay it. And the more that we prevent our kids from experiencing reasonable, powerful compounding interest, the more we set them up to become credit card debt addicts, because they don't get it. They look at what's happening in the bank at 0.1% and they go, yeah, that's dumb. I'm just going to go spend money I don't have. It feels better. I need a medicated emotion. I feel inadequate. I feel insignificant. I'm going to spend money I don't have because I don't know how interest works. So we need access to all these things as soon as possible. And if your kid is 63 and still haven't learned these things, it's the same truths. It's the same effort. It's the same experience. So we're going to talk about how to set them up for success. And I'm going to do this in stages. If your kid is young, which I'm looking in the audience, there's a few that might have that, right? So we're talking less than, say, 15. Then we're going to talk about that stage of early adulthood, college up into kind of early family creation. And then we're going to end on what happens if I missed all that. And now my kid is in their 50s and they still see these same behaviors. How do we fix that? So if you're listening to me talk about how to set young kids up and you're going, I don't have those anymore, I get it. We're going to get there. But we got to understand it from the perspective of the entire timeline. So here's how we set our kids up for success. If the hardest part of money is the having of it, we need to let them have some. We need to get them working that muscle of having it. You know, my oldest is 17 and he is killing it. My middle one is about to turn 15 and still has not learned. He has 36 cents right now in his Bank of Mom and Dad account, his spending account, 36 cents. I'm like, Wes, come on, man. Like, we can do better. It's going to get there. I have hope. And then my daughter is going to be driving a Lexus when she turns 16. She is just saving like a banshee. So all these kids are going to have different experiences, but we need to set them up the same way. And the way that we set them up for success is this idea of the Bank of Mom and Dad. I started this with my kids when they were 5, and I used to keep it as a spreadsheet, and it was a nightmare. But I did it anyway, and basically the deal was you put money in the Bank of Mom and Dad, you get an allowance. Every week, you get an allowance based on your age. So if you're 10, you get $10. If you're 5, you get $5 a week. And if the money stays in the Bank of Mom and Dad, the Bank of Mom and Dad pays 10% interest. Okay, and you can't open an account. So don't even ask. That's always the first question. Like, I have a large deposit. So the Bank of Mom and Dad pays 10% interest. We pay it, the parents pay it. And it allows the kid to start to realize having money is cool. Man, I got an extra week's worth of allowance just in interest if I just let it sit there. Right? We got to give them a reason to let it sit there. And the bank is not going to do that. The traditional bank is going to give them a reason to spend it, right? So we set them up with that. The other thing that this does is it creates decision autonomy. This is the biggest ingredient to success. We need to let the people who are having the money make the decision on what they do with it. The longer we stay in control and we have authority over their decisions, the longer we perpetuate that dependency well into their, older adult years. And so we need to give them decision autonomy. The way that this works now, and I have it a little further down, I use an app called Greenlight, which does all this by itself. It's fantastic. I don't have a spreadsheet anymore. It's great. But my kids actually have a debit card. And that's also a great step in this new world that we live in where nobody carries cash. It's great for young kids to know what coins are and what, how much a $5 bill is and all that kind of stuff. But eventually they're going to have to learn that nobody actually uses that stuff anymore. Everybody's just swiping. And it's a whole lot easier to swipe for money that you don't have when you don't understand how all this works. And so we need to get them used to swiping and tracking and understanding it. So Greenlight is great. You get a debit card. All the parent paid interest is built in. You can set up savings account, spending account, giving account, which is great. Generosity is a huge part of our family conversation. So my kids have money that they've set aside as part of their allowance to actually give it away, right? So we build all that in, and then because we've given them the autonomy to make their own decisions, we let Yoda do his job. So my son goes into Five Below, and I'm just over there in the fetal position, like, oh my gosh, this is gonna be horrible, right? Like, I know what's coming, and he goes crazy, and he's swipey, 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 and he comes out with a handful of stuff that we just throw in the trash. But it's his decision. And here's how it changes the conversation, which is so powerful. Remember that blame and shame cycle that we get into? Now I can actually just digest it with him. Hey man, what happened there? What did you experience? What did you hope that thing was going to do that it didn't do? Let's talk about that. I'm not mad at you. It's your money. I don't care. Right? Now we don't have to keep having that power struggle. He has the power, but I'm debriefing with him. Now I'm kind of coming alongside of him and I'm helping him learn, ideally, from these mistakes. Hopefully also helping him identify that they were in fact mistakes, right? Sometimes we disagree on that. No, this was great. That 5 minutes that it worked was awesome. So you never know. The other thing that is so key about letting Yoda do his job is then you can start to reference back, hey, remember the last time that you bought a thing that didn't work the way you hoped it would? You think this will be similar? Right? You can bring back that learning that they had by being on their team rather than being this antagonistic relationship when it comes to money. We also, as we talked about this idea of parent paid interest, when we pay that 10% interest, they're learning what compound interest actually can accomplish. And that having the money and letting it sit there and just do its thing is very powerful. Over time, we need to transition. Money goes from just being for once. At the beginning, it's entirely once. Have at it. I want them to have terrible mistakes with $5 because if I let them do that when they're young, then I can avoid the mistake for $5,000 when they get out of college, right? So we're gonna give them access to these decisions and we're gonna let them make these mistakes. But then over time, we're gonna start injecting needs and wants. So when my kids get to the age of 10, they have to buy their own shoes. When they turn 13 and they get a cell phone, they have to buy the phone. I'm not buying it for them. And they have to pay for their line. It's their problem. If they want it, they got to pay for it. If they need it, we start to inject things like clothes. My 17-year-old pays for all of his own gas. He pays for his car insurance. He is paying for needs as well as balancing wants. And that's the thing. He's got to get used to the having of it. And to your point, Jack, the spending and the balancing and the budgeting of all of it, right? But we want that to happen while they're still under our roof and we can give them a sandbox to play in. And they can fall and scrape their knee and it's okay. Because at least they're not breaking their arm, right? They're not getting to a place where the recovery is so hard. Common question I get at this point that I want to just hit, what do we do about chores, right? Should we pay our kids to do their chores? My attitude is no. In the Lenhoff household, choose what you want. But my thought is, hey, taking out the trash is just part of living in the house. I'm not paying you to do what we need to do in order to live that. I'm not going to pay you to clean your room. Cleaning your room is just being a normal, decent human, right? We're not going to pay you to do things that no one's ever going to pay you for. So we don't want to reinforce that they only do chores or they only do work where they can get money. And then the other thing about this stage, which is really scary, but really important, is let your kids in on the reality that you're living as soon as possible. We got to stop making money taboo. We have an annual meeting. My kids know our net worth. They know what I made last year in income. They know what we spent, what we gave away. They know all the details. My 12-year-old daughter has seen our balance sheet. She knows exactly what's happening. And the reason why is because I need them to know what life actually costs. They are living in a really weird world where most of their stuff is bought for them and they got this little weird thing. And so they've never bought these big ticket items. They've never paid for a vacation. They don't know what that costs. I need them to know what that costs. The only way they're going to know is when the person who's paying for it lets them know, right? So we actually have quarterly meetings as a family. We talk about here's what we did in the last 90 days. Here's what came in. Here's what we gave away. Here's what we spent our money on. We're having this conversation and I'm having my kids in on that discussion. What are we doing in the next 90 days? How much do we want to give away? Where are we giving it to? I want them in on that dialogue because they are part of this conversation. Now, I think a lot of people are afraid of that. You may all sweat a little bit even just thinking about that. No matter how old your kid is, letting them in on your reality is scary because our assumption is they're going to tell everybody. Our assumption is they're going to start rubbing their hands together, getting super excited about all the stuff they could do. And I wish I could say, oh no, it'll be perfect. Don't have to worry about it at all. Yeah, totally. You know it. Exactly. That's right, Pete. I mean, it's like, yeah, of course they're going to do that. They're not going to, it softens. It gets easier. It gets less overwhelming and big the more that you talk about it. And so the reason why it's still so scary is because you've never done it. And so it's big. And it's scary, but I see families struggle so much with this later on because they have no idea what their parents have. They have no idea how it's set up. They don't know how it impacts them. And they start to make assumptions. They assume that my sibling's going to get more than me because they always loved her more than me, right? They assume that this person's going to get that because they love, it's just so sick how quickly they start to project on you all of their assumptions. And then suddenly, like, it gets cold in the room, right? You're like, what the heck? We never even talked about it. And somehow you're assuming all these bad things about me. The answer to that, the antidote to that is vulnerability and authenticity. Just letting them in on the truth and getting the conversation had. The sooner we do that, the less scary it is. All right. So what happens? Yeah, go ahead. Yes, please. Oh, I love it. Yeah, bring it. Let's do it.
There's a counterpoint to that, and that is we as parents are many times, kind of hesitant to find out what it is our kids really have.
Yes, that's right.
And we make assumptions on that
100%.
on that end as well.
That's exactly right. Thank you for adding that. You're absolutely right. It's a two-way conversation, and it's not happening either way, right? And so we do need to open that dialogue. The other thing that is super helpful in that is when your kid shares with you a mistake that they're making or an experience that they're having, you can tell them, oh yeah, I did the same thing. That is such a gift. Kids always assume that their parents did it right. They never made a mistake. They're always right on target. And when you can look them in the eye and say, man, when I was your age, I bought this thing. It was such a piece of garbage and I wasted so much money on it. And so I know exactly what you're feeling, but they're feeling it with their money rather than with yours, right? So you can commiserate with them and become more human to them. But absolutely, it needs to be a two-way street. Let's talk. Yeah, go ahead, John. Oh, sorry. Bring in the mic.
One of the things we did with our children is that we actually gave them the opportunity. They had a budget, if you will,
Yep.
mom and dad bank
Yep.
on it, but we would enjoy their purchasing processes. We tried to enjoy what they were thinking. Hey, tell me what it was.
Yep.
And then if it didn't work, let's have a conversation about it,
That's right.
because then it was like you're beginning to enjoy their experience and share their experience. And later on, we found that they were more than willing to come back to us and say, this is the experience we're having.
Yes.
And so that early communication really led to better communication later on.
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah. The sooner this becomes just a normal dialogue, the better. I mean, we just don't talk about it. It's unbelievable. I don't know why we're so scared, but that fear only grows because we keep protecting them from it. And now it's bigger and different. And now we have to protect them even more. Go ahead, Dave.
I'm curious, in your quarterly meeting at home, does your kids also share their bank account balances? And then do they compare with each other? And then, that dynamic?
Great question. Oh, that's so good. And yes, the answer is yes. One of the things that's super fun is when early on in this process, one of my kids looked at me and said, hey, Dad, are we rich? And I said, well, your mom and I are doing pretty well. You have $43, right? But we do have it's a dialogue of what are you doing? How are you thinking about what do you need to plan for? My kids, it's like, hey, if they're at a certain age, if you want to get that phone when you turn 13, it's coming, you're 12. You better have a plan to save for it, right? So that's part of the conversation in those quarterlies. Great question. All right, let's move on. Let's say we missed that. So great idea if they're 4. They're not 4 anymore. Now what do I do? All right, if they are in their teenage, early adult years, unfortunately, they're going to make the same mistakes. They're just going to involve a comma now, right? That $10 mistake is now a $1,000 mistake. They're going to use credit cards because they can get them. One of the best things my parents did, they're sitting right here. They got me a credit card when I was a teenager. Best thing they ever did was give me access to what it felt like to get a credit card bill that said I owed $80 and I could pay $5, right? If they don't know what that means, they just pay the minimum because they never knew what the heck was going on. So getting that rhythm of understanding, I pay it all off. I never pay a dime of interest. That's all stuff they need access to. If they get it late, they're going to make mistakes. Now, here's the key at this stage. Let Yoda do his job. Get out of the way. We as parents do so many things to bail them out because the problem is these mistakes hurt. We don't feel the need to bail out a $5 mistake, right? There's nothing about that that compels us to go and save them from themselves because it's not that big of a deal. Who cares? You skin your knee, get up and walk it off. But this kind of mistake could actually do lasting damage, and everything in us as their parent wants to rescue them. And so we end up bailing out their mistakes directly. Here, pay your credit card bill off. Here, make a loan payment on your car, get it back to current. Here, right? We're telling them what to do with the money that we're giving them. Now, remember, the hardest part about money is the having of it. They didn't actually have that money because it's your money and you told them go do this. All they are is your errand boy, right? They never actually had any of that money. They just got it and they gave it to the credit card. Okay, yep. And we're perpetuating that dependency. What we want to do is actually give them decision-making autonomy. Here's $5,000. Do whatever you want with it. Oh, did everything and you just go, right? Right? I know what they're going to do with it. They're going to totally blow it. And the answer is, yeah, they probably will, unfortunately. But eventually, as you keep doing that, you're going to let them make the decision to make their mistake right. And it's their money that they had and they chose it. The more that we keep making these decisions for them, the more we perpetuate the same problems. Yoda is so powerful. Yeah, yeah, go ahead. Yoda is buyer's remorse. Buyer's remorse. So when we make a decision and we regret it, we only regret it when it costs us something. There's no regret when it costs you something. They need to feel that pain of, oh, I shouldn't have done that with my money. They actually don't care if they did it with your money. Doesn't hurt. So decision-making autonomy is so key here. We want to give them resources. We want them to have money, but we want them to make the decision on what they do with that money. Don't direct and tell them what to do. Now, they're going to decide to pay for that spring break trip instead of paying off their credit card. And you're going to be like, ha. We don't need to bail them out of some of these things. The thing that's so frustrating to me is how often I'll see parents tell me, that idiot, I had to bail him out again. I had to give him $3,000 to pay off his credit card bill. And I'm like, you didn't have to do any of that. You didn't have to do anything. And $3,000 worth of credit card debt is not going to kill anybody. But it's going to teach them a lot if you just let them deal with it. Okay? I think I've beaten that dead horse. Next thing, parent-paid compounding. What does that look like at this stage? Right? So if we have a kid who's in their teenage years and they're working and whatever the situation is, maybe they're starting into a new job, they launched out of college. How do we create this experience of the power of compounding? One way is to match their savings. Look, if you put money into your Roth IRA, I'll double it. I'll put 2,000. You put 2,000, I'll put 2,000. You put 3,000, I'll put 3,000. Right? There's great discipline that you can start to create and then ramp it up. Be even bigger than their employer. If their employer gives them a 3% match, say, I'll give you a 10% match. If you have these resources that they're going to get anyway, we want to start using them to build the disciplines along the way, and seeing those balances grow faster than if they just put $25 a month in, we'll start to teach them that having money and letting it sit there is really powerful. You can still play a great role in that, even if you're not doing the bank of mom and dad. They're too old for that, right? And then lastly, at this stage, family meetings are huge. This is such a great stage because they're starting to understand. They know what a mortgage is, right? They know what some of these details are. They're starting to understand the language. If they've never been exposed to it until now, get them exposed. Get them used to your reality. Particularly at this stage, your reality is probably still not, or maybe is not, hey, we've got everything paid off. We got piles and piles of money. At this stage, you're still like, we're paying for your stupid school, right? Like everything's still costing you a lot. And there's a lot to discuss about what they're paying, what they're costing you. And they understand what life really costs when you start to let them in on your life. this is a really important time for them to be in. It's also less scary because you're not telling them about your really complicated estate plan and all the ways you've layered in a lot of complexity. You're telling them about pretty simple things at this stage, hopefully. Okay. Any questions on this stage? It's the same stuff. It's just bigger. It just costs you more to teach them the same thing, unfortunately. Great question. I have not done that. My deal, so Max, our oldest, is working. And what I told him is, you're paying for your own gas. Yeah, the question was, do they have to keep, the kids have to keep the money in the account for a certain amount of time before you match it. My deal with Max, for example, is, whatever you work on, whatever your income is, your job is to pay for your gas, pay for your car insurance, pay for your needs. I will put your income into your Roth IRA for you. Because you can put 100% of their income up to that $6,500 limit. He made $2,700 last year. And I just threw $2,700 into his Roth. I mean, you talk about power of compound, like this thing is growing and he's just paying for gas and all these other things. So we're starting to get him used to that. I don't have a rule of, and if you take it out, I'm going to smack you around, you know, like if they take it out, they'll learn, right? Like we got to give them access to some of this. Yeah, go ahead.
So what if you can't afford to do this? I mean, if
Yeah.
you're a single parent
Yep.
or you're going through.
Yes, great question. Great question. The affordability is always the challenge. I hear that a lot when people are like, I can't pay my kid, you know, $10 a week in allowance. And my answer is, well, you can if they're paying for things you would otherwise be paying for anyway. Right? So if we can marry, hey, I'm giving you this, but you got to buy your own shoes because that's part of your learning. I would have been buying the shoes anyway. Right? So that as long as you're marrying that I'm giving you resources that you can have, but now you have the experience of having to deal with budgeting and planning for affording these things, you're building in those disciplines. If you can't afford these things, then the biggest thing is just getting them in on the conversation of what's going on, right? Because they don't know what things cost. And so if the family meeting is all that you implement, you have accomplished a ton. Because if they're over here, you know, it's the people that said, I was poor, but I never knew we were poor. You've heard that phrase. It's like, well, that's a mistake. Your parents should have let you in because now we're a team. Now we've got this tension of, hey, we got to decide. Let's decide together as a family. Do we do this or do we do this? Do we go on this vacation or do we pay down our debt? And they're now realizing, oh, there are consequences to these decisions rather than, you know, who cares? It's mom and dad's money. So whatever you can do, even if you can't afford these numbers, implement the same discipline if you can. So, all right. So let's talk about the last stage. So, oops, I think I went too far. Yeah. What about adult kids that act like toddlers? All right. So these are our 40-somethings that are still really reckless. They have a ton of credit card debt. They continue to make terrible decisions. I have had so many conversations with clients that are at this stage, and they're like, well, and I tell them, we got to get them to a place where they have some money. You've got to start giving them money. And they're like, oh gosh, that's terrible. They're going to blow it. I'm like, yep, you betcha. They're going to blow every dime of this. You're going to give them $10,000, $11,000, and you're going to watch them make decisions that you absolutely hate. But they're making those decisions because you never really gave them access to anything else. So it's going to cost you more than you'd like. But unless you're planning on disinheriting them, which is an option, most people don't take that one. But if that's the only way that they're not going to end up with this money. And if we don't get them working that muscle of the having of it, then what happens is they don't have it, they don't have it, they don't have it, and then you die, and then they have all of it. And you think they're going to make a bad decision with that first $10,000 gift. Wait till they get, I mean, this is where Johnny goes and buys a Porsche, right? Because he can. And he's never gotten used to the having of it. So this is a stage where we need to start getting them used to the having of it. And this can feel a little bit like a bottomless pit. Just to be honest with you, like the teenager college years feel like maybe, you know, you give them a little bit, you give them a little bit. This is the kind of stage where if they're on deck to inherit significant wealth, you're going to need to keep pouring that wealth into what feels like just a complete waste of money until they finally get it. And I hate that that's the only way to do it, but at this stage, it's the only way I've seen it work. The only other option that we have is to be super restrictive and layer in all these complexities in your trust that make sure they never actually get anything. And what we're doing is we're perpetuating dependency. They're dependent on you even after you're gone, right? You're still making decisions for them. And one of the mistakes that really sets up failure, this is why the third generation blows it, is because in the third generation, mom and dad didn't have any money. Grandma and grandpa did. And after grandma and grandpa died, mom and dad still didn't have any money. And I never felt what it felt like to have money. And so when it comes to me, even if your kids got a little bit of a taste of what to do, that next generation blows it because they never even got close. So we need to be experiencing this having of it. Don't rescue. Anything you're doing to rescue your adult kids is perpetuating dependency. And anything you do to delay this until your death turns them into lottery winners. And so this is a great time to start moving in that direction and getting them used to it. This is also the time where we do things like family fire drills. We get all the family around the table and we say, okay, mom and dad die, this is what happens. You're the executor, you're the trustee, that's what this means, this is what that means, you're the power of attorney. This is how this all plays out, and this is what it means to you. You stand to inherit $1 million. And you're going to start getting that now in gifts as we start getting you used to this. But just so you know, this is where it ends. And our goal as a firm is to get you ready where you're perpetuating the disciplines and the generosity and the approach to money that mom and dad had. And that's going to take some time. And so we're going to work on that together. But the longer you delay, the less time there is for that to grow, and the more likely it is that they're going to make huge mistakes. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, yeah, yep. Uh-huh. I've never heard that before.
James, can you repeat that?
Yeah. Right. Yep. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. Yep. Yep. You keep feeding the problem, right? That's a huge concern. So the question is, if you have 4 kids and 2 of them are awesome at money and 2 of them are bad, do you just keep throwing good money after bad to the people who struggle with this? And to some degree, the answer is yes. But you can, well, not if you adjust for it, right? So you can say, and this is what the family meeting does. Hey guys, y'all stand to inherit $500,000 each, whatever. Here's the deal. If you want to delay and let that grow and compound, because you understand what compounding money does, we can adjust our estate to make sure that that's what you get. If you want it now, or in fact, you need it now to start getting used to it, we're going to adjust the estate to say, we've given you some of it already, right? So you can account for that. What I think we make the mistake of believing is that equal is fair and fair is equal. That's not actually the way life works. You have the ability and the decision-making authority in your wealth to decide how you want this to play out. I've had clients that have said, look, this one kid of mine, they sold a business, they got $10 million. What is my $500,000 going to mean to them? And I've already had the conversation as a family, our entire family, this wealth would make a bigger impact over here, and they're okay with it. And so I'm going to give it to them. And it's not equal, but it's fair in the client's mind. And you might go, that's not allowed. Sure it is. It may not be allowed in your framework. You may think, no, it has to all be exactly the same. But if we set them up where it all has to be exactly the same, then what happens is the people who are good at money get the delay and the benefit of compounding and all the other things. And the people who are bad at money keep digging a hole, digging a hole, digging a hole. And then when you pass away, they fill it in and blow the rest. Where if we meet them in that process and start getting them access, I believe, and I'm sure I'm wrong in certain cases, like your kid may be different, but I believe that the biggest challenge is getting them over that hurdle of all the mistakes they need to make and just the experience of having it and letting it sit there. And that only happens in an open dialogue where we're having conversations and we're doing that work together as a family. So talk to us. I'd be happy to kind of help think through what does that look like in your circumstance. But there are ways to account for that and make sure that in the end it feels closer to equal, but in the process it's closer to fair. That's what we're trying to land on. If that's any help. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So let me be clear. Yeah, great question. we do family fire drills where we get everybody together and talk about estate design and structure and how this all works. We do that. You're gonna have to run your own family meeting, but I'm happy to talk about like methods and what we do and give you a little more insight into that. Okay. Last thought, I just want to share with you a couple more things, and then we're gonna have a little bit of time for questions. We need to be more and more aware of the fact that the sooner we open this dialogue, the sooner we start making progress on all of these things. Share your spending plan with your kids. Share your vision for what you're hoping to accomplish with the resources that you've been entrusted with. Start talking about what that looks like. I've had, for example, grandparents start to like usher in grandkids. They have a donor advised fund and they say, hey, you guys each have $5,000 to give away. Out of my donor advised fund, I'm going to give you each money to start being charitable because that's a huge value of mine and I want to impart it, right? So get them in on those things. Don't just assume they're going to learn it on their own. You've got to set them up to actually have exposure to it. A family vision can help a lot. We actually have a process to establish a family vision if that's something that you're interested in, where you decide together what your values are that you're trying to perpetuate in the world. And then your kids and your grandkids can start to catch some of that vision. Here's the deal. I think when we get to the bottom line, that whole starting point where we said the third generation blows it, I think the successive generations blow it because they get further and further away from the having of it. The only way to fix this is to have it. The further you are away from the having of money, the less prepared you are to have it. And this is why this generational transfer is so hard. Because our natural response is to not let them have it because they're going to screw it up. Our natural response is to pull away and protect them and not talk about it and shut down because it's dangerous. But the longer we delay them having it, the more we're setting up that blowing it scenario because they don't know what to do with it. They have to work that muscle of having it. And the only way you do that is if you have it. So I know it sounds like that boils down to something really simple. It's like, yep, yeah, it does. That's it. No rocket science here. And it does bring in a lot of complexities and some layering and some things like that in your estate design. But at the end of the day, the sooner we get them to have it, the sooner they get better at having it. So that's what I got for you. Questions? Give us what comes to mind as you think about questions. Oh, Megan's got a question. Oh, we got questions. Okay, everybody's got questions. All right.
I have the microphone, so I'll
Yeah,
go
go
next.
for it, Brian. Yeah.
So along the lines of multiple children,
Yeah.
the question in my/our mind is not necessarily a function of how they handle money, but values that
Yeah.
they espouse
Yep.
as compared to what we do.
Yep.
That gets a little sticky, so maybe you could address that.
Yeah, I think it definitely gets sticky. I also want to at least acknowledge that the end game, again, if you are not going to disinherit the person who doesn't share your values, they're going to get that money. And so what I would say as the solution to that is talking about your values in an open dialogue about money. Hey, this is what we love, is using resources to lift this burden or make an impact over here. These are the things that matter to us. Then you're giving them money and they're going to do things that matter to them. And that's always the case. But if you're telling them, I'm going to give you this because I want you to give to that, or I want you to spend it this way, you haven't actually given it to them, right? They haven't had it. And so at some level, it's the having of it and then the constant conversation about what we do with what we have. We want to usher them back into that dialogue. But you're not going to win that game of I'm only giving you money if you do what I tell you to do with my values. You're not giving them money. You're not letting them have it. You still have it. They're just your errand runner. So it's that combination. Start small. I wouldn't be like writing giant checks to kids who may not share your values, but move in that direction and then be talking in an open dialogue. That would be my answer. It's not easy. We can talk more offline too. Yeah.
So along the lines of values.
Yeah.
One of the things that my husband and I have talked about is instilling a work ethic
Mhm.
and other values in that sense.
Yeah.
By having these conversations and opening up that dialogue, are we creating a situation where our kids may not value the work ethic, or we give them a scapegoat to feel like they can rely on us in the future?
Well, I think you give them you certainly could see it that way. I think you give them a more honest view of what their future involves. And then ideally, if you're having open dialogue, you're making some of those decisions together. So one of the challenges, for example, with the work ethic, the way we've solved that is, again, we don't pay for chores. Like you take the trash out because you live here and that's part of living here. But the expectation is when you turn 14, you're getting a job and you're gonna make some money. And it's not gonna be a lot of money, but when you turn 14 and you're making a job, now the stuff that you have to buy, the pressure of what you need being your responsibility grows. And so we're feeding the work ethic because we're not just giving them money for once, we're actually giving them expectations that they're going to pay for stuff that they need. And the only way to do that is to actually work, right? So you introduce it that way. And ideally then by the time you get later, that work ethic is there. I think the challenge is that the work ethic, if the kid is in his or her 40s and the work ethic hasn't been there ever, it's going to be a journey, right? Like you waited too long maybe, but that's okay. But the other thing I would say is if you can get to that place where you are rewarding the behavior that you want to see with that compound interest, that parent paid compound interest, like I'll put your money in your Roth for you, I will match whatever your employer matches plus 10%, whatever it is. Like when you're giving them rewards that are based on earning income, they start to grow a little bit there. So you, in the back, yeah, sorry.
Having different children.
Yes.
And their values are very different. Like
Sure.
ones I'm never gonna have to worry about. One I'm always gonna
Yep.
have to worry about.
Yep.
He has made a mistake.
Yep.
A huge mistake.
Yes.
Buying a car.
Yep.
You know, on the spot. And how much do you let them fall? And because my heart is grieving,
Yep.
I can't meet that hurdle that he had just put himself in.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one thing for sure, if saving them from themselves is going to destroy you, don't do it. Right. This is the whole classic thing I talk to parents all the time about. Their priority order is so messed up because they'll overfund college education. Like that's all they care about. And I say, hey, here's the deal. If you go to your kids and you say, I'm going to pay for college, you're going to go to college for free, but as soon as you graduate, I'm moving into your basement because I got nothing. Or I'm okay. Yeah, I'm okay. But you are going to have to take some student loans and some other things, but they would rather pick the second one, right? So you've got to make sure you're okay. Whatever we're doing, if it's going to set us up for our own financial mistake that we can't recover from, then we're just compounding mistake on mistake. So if you're in a position where you can save them, my rule of thumb is if it is absolutely going to destroy them, you step in and you intervene, but you still, and they want, as long as they want to fix the problem too, they see it as a problem. If they're like, no, this is working great. This 1984 Taurus is awesome, right? You know, I paid $6,000 for it, whatever. And you're like, ooh, good luck with that. If they don't see it as a problem, you stepping in just feels like intruding in control. If they see it as a problem and it's in your power to help them, then you're giving them money, but you're not telling them what to do. You're saying, look, I see this, you see this too. Here's some money with no strings attached. And ideally, if it's a $5,000 problem, give them $3,000, right? Don't fix it entirely for them. Just alleviate the pain. But do it in a way where it's not just a direct payment where you're swooping in and saving them from the pain. Because the pain is worth something. They learn from it. Yeah, go ahead.
Question comes up again for if you have a situation where you do have a child that adults now.
Mhm.
but there are life circumstances, things that happen.
Yeah.
That they have no real control over.
Yes.
And they need help.
Yep. Yep.
And so question is how best to try to handle that if, you know, they've run up against something that has created a challenge that they really didn't. do
Through
it
no
because
fault of their own. Right.
Their
Yeah.
profligate or whatever else.
Yeah.
Along with that is the question of what if you have two children and one is very, very successful now.
Yeah.
And another child is also very successful.
Yep.
But in terms of monetary financial rewards, there's a big gap.
Yep. Yep.
And there's also a natural, how do you say it? Comparison of siblings. you know,
Sibling rivalry.
How am I doing?
Yeah.
You know, I
Yeah.
wouldn't call it maybe in our case a rivalry, but
Sure.
you know, there's
Yep.
there is that tension
Tension,
and
sure.
that,
Yeah.
and those worries and just how to kind of handle some of
Yep.
those things.
Great question. So I'll take the first question first. The idea of this is not their fault. This is something that we don't hold them, like, we don't blame them for it. This isn't something that we need to, like, they don't need Yoda. They got plenty of Yoda before. This is really just a random scenario. If it is in your power to help them, help them. If it is in your power to help them and you don't help them, and then when they turn some other age after they have suffered and struggled through this problem, then they inherit a bunch of money where they're like, where were you 10 years ago? You could have saved me from all this pain. That is a worthy thing to step into. It's not disincentivizing them. It's not breaking them of a pattern that it's just, hey, this is hard and we can make it not hard. And I don't want to wait until I die for that. Right? Like, that's a beautiful thing. I think that is every time you should do that. And in that scenario where it's not some behavior that you're trying to break, you can give it directly and say, this is for that thing, right? Because that's such a beautiful gift. So second question, the tension of the comparisonitis. I find that tension particularly grows when there's not open dialogue and there's not a conversation that's happening. And so one of the things that's really fascinating is when we talk about our realities together, a lot of times the person who's doing really well starts rooting for the person who's not. It's really funny. Like, I had a conversation today with a client and her daughters. And one of the daughters has kids, the other daughter doesn't. And we're talking about some potential gifting. And as we're talking about that, she's like, well, I have to give to the grandkids, so I won't give her as much that I can give to and the other daughter's like, no, it's okay. Just because I don't have kids, it's okay. I want my nieces and nephews to thrive. Like, this is fine. But when that wouldn't have happened outside of that open dialogue, right? It's not fair, or I'm sorry, it's not equal. It's not equal. But the daughter that was getting less felt like it was totally fair. She didn't have a problem with it at all. But you would never know that unless you have that dialogue. So what I think you'll find is that people when they understand this is what I have, and it's way more than what that person has, and they're still doing right, they're just in a lower paying career or whatever, it starts to get easier to make things less equal because they feel the fairness of it. Does that make sense? So, yeah. How much time? Oh, we're over. Yeah, you want to be last question, Jack? Is that okay? And then I'll be around. If you guys want to, I'll hang. If you want to come up and talk to me, I'm happy to.
I just
Yep.
want to make a comment to the people that some of the things I've heard. We had to start out these communications with our kids. They both had kind of special needs, if you will. And having that family meeting, there
Yeah.
are things when you first start out having those meetings that you wish you never heard, or didn't want to hear.
Right.
But and so you grit your teeth a little bit, but it was so important to have those so
Yeah.
that they had the communication lines available. So when you do talk money, like we do talk with them now,
Yeah.
they are there knowing that we're being honest with them.
Yeah.
They sense really quickly on a value. If they don't have the same values of you and they say something, you got to kind of like, okay, that sounds great. But you have to do that so that they're willing to come back to it in the future.
That's right. That's right. Oh, Absolutely. And the thing that's so interesting, when we have hard conversations, I tell people around here all the time, what happens when we have hard conversations? And the answer is everybody feels better, right? When we do it well, everybody feels better. We avoid them because they seem intimidating and scary, but the truth is they're incredibly binding. They draw us closer to each other. And so those family meetings may feel scary, but they're incredibly valuable because what comes out is, hey, I'm in trouble. You know, I need help. Okay, let's talk about how do we help as a family? Those kinds of things aren't available unless we're having those hard conversations. So absolutely. Yep. Great. Yeah. Yep. Great question. How far down do you go in the family meetings? Spouses and children, or do you involve the grandchildren? I don't have grandchildren yet. So right now it's spouses and children. Spouse and children. Let me be clear. I heard it as soon as I said it. That was not right. Anyway, yeah, right, exactly, right. Right now it's just spouse and children. One of the things that's a little bit tricky is I want to instill our family vision into my kids, but I also want to give them the freedom to create their own, right? And so I don't want to necessarily, push my family vision into my grandkids. There are some things I'm going to want them to learn from me, but I ultimately want it to fit in the context of my kids' family vision for their family, right? Ideally, that becomes some generational transfer. I think that's how Jonathan Edwards was able to make this impact, is that he was able to kind of keep this identity of, hey, as a family, this is who we are. And then over time, those things splinter and become a little bit different, but they're still in the same, they rhyme, maybe, is the idea. So, yeah.
We've got a family trip coming up, and
Yeah.
I've said something about, we've never had these meetings.
Yeah, right.
And we're going to somewhat have this meeting.
Yeah.
Do we tell the kids we're having this meeting?
Yes. Yes. Great question. Yes. This is not something you want to just spring on them, because I think they will pull away. They'll get frustrated, particularly if you're using vacation time to have this family. If you say, hey, just so you know, one of these days we're going to set aside, we're going to spend a few hours just talking through some of this stuff. They have time to kind of settle around it. Yeah. Yeah. You definitely want to make it open. I would provide an agenda if I were in your shoes, like, hey, this is what we're going to do. And this is the stuff we want to cover so that they feel prepared to have those discussions. All right. We're going to wrap it up. I'm still here, but please come and talk to me if there's anything that you need. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate you being here. Yeah. Let me turn this off.